So the second page is a draft proposed sustainability goal for the Madera subbasin. So I'm going to just let everybody take a moment to read it if they like, and then just any ideas, feedback, or discussion recommendations on this. And it'll probably be nuanced a little bit as we go, and there'll probably be some editing to it, but this is just the overall concept for the sustainability goal of the subbasin. I'm sorry. I'm going to be using the whiteboard shortly, so if you can actually move that, that'd be great. Thanks.
You're welcome.
So it's broken down by goal description, discussion of measures, and then explanation of how the goal will be achieved in the next 20 years.
Just as a reminder, this is sub-basin wide, so specific to MID would be for the plan as a whole. For the plan.
Tommy, that would be the GSP for the 4.
So as Dina mentioned, you either have to be accounted for in the coordination agreement amongst the different plans or within the overall plan for the basin. So since we have multiple, it will need to be recognized in that coordination agreement if it's not consistent.
Well, it's supposed to be consistent. So if this would be in our GSP along with the other GSPs or rolled into the coordination agreement.
Consistent in the plan.
Yeah.
It's different plans.
Yeah. Okay. Any thoughts, ideas? Is the groundwater MIT groundwater committee okay with this? With a few, I mean, obviously with some editing.
I don't have any changes I can think of it. It's
Okay.
like
Yeah.
a general goal,
Yeah, it's very
good objectives.
conceptual, high level. We just want to put this in front of the committee as we're moving forward with developing the GSP. So.
And not taking an action to approve or anything like that, it's just a chance to comment and you can give direction to staff as we work with the groups to put this into the plan, which for ultimate approval.
So,
Devil's in the details, I say let's move on.
Okay. Okay. Yep. So for 3A, we'll just move forward with this language or similar language, and if anything changes, we will let you know. Okay, 3B. Oh, go ahead.
No. Go ahead, Dina.
No, a
3B.
discussion recommendation on measurable objectives, minimum thresholds, and 2020-2040 implementation period transitional plan.
Okay, so on the screen and then the board, you have handouts. This is an example of what we've been talking about in the technical expert meetings related to measurable objectives and minimum thresholds. So those are 2 requirements in the GSP process. So this, I just want to be really clear, this is just an example with some of the concepts that we've been talking about. So we're not talking about any specific details related to this hydrograph. Again, this is just for concepts and how we are discussing setting these within the technical expert group, and obviously want any feedback from our board members or the public on this. But this conceptual example is a hydrograph. The blue dots are actual the physical measurements. So, you have this for me.
So this is at one specific well or an average of a bunch?
This is one specific well, and if I
Okay.
can, whoops, sorry.
Just,
I'm trying.
How did you calculate the minimum threshold?
Okay, so I'm going to explain that if I can get this to work. So this is one specific well, and so,
that's where.
sorry.
I can go there for you.
Okay, let me one
Sure, what
second.
you're talking about.
Tommy's going to be Vanna? Okay.
I got
So-
another point.
So the blue dots on the left-hand side of the screen are the specific well measurements for this well. The green vertical lines represent the implementation period, so 2020 to 2040 for Sigma. So what our consultants have done, David's Engineering, and that's the consultants for the whole sub-basin, is they have taken specific wells and the well data, and then they've applied through their modeling process all the projects that are proposed by all of the GSAs within the subbasin. So the results of that, along with some average type climate conditions that they're anticipating, is the reddish brownish line that zigzags up and down. So that's what they're anticipating this specific well, how it would perform with all of the GSP projects in place for the entire subbasin, along with average climate conditions that they're taking into account.
So let me just state that again. So the green line 2020, that's when the plan takes effect to implement those projects by 2040. You're seeing what would happen assuming an average hydrology during that period and then beyond. How those projects would be done at groundwater levels. So obviously, day one, 2020, we're not going to have all the projects done basin-wide. So what does that mean? What are the impacts? And that's what this is intended to show. A little bit of information on that.
How do they model, say, 2030 when, you know, X amount of crops are gonna be gone?
So they're taking one of the projects that's being proposed by Madera County is demand reduction.
Yeah.
So that project theoretically is being modeled in this process. So all projects for the GSPs that have been given by the different GSAs are being reflected in this hydrograph. And again, you know, this is just one specific well, but to give an example or an idea.
So the county theoretically gave the information about how much
Yes,
demand reduction
yes.
they're expecting to do within their.
Yeah, but this is one scenario.
This is what's currently being modeled.
This is what's being modeled because their advisory committee.
Correct. Had given them direction at some point.
You're right. It's
So-
one scenario, and that's true because nothing has been finalized.
Right.
So this
Nothing's
is
been
definitely
finalized there.
definitely a moving target.
Yes.
But what we need to discuss is the potentials and how our approach is
Right.
related to setting these thresholds.
Right. And again, this is all concept level right now. But so what the discussion is theoretically this brownish zigzag line would be the water level responses to all of the projects during this implementation period and then beyond through 2090. With that, what we've also looked at is the number of domestic wells in this section and the average top perforation depth and the average well depth. So for this particular well in this particular section, and you can see on the top, there's a total of 6 domestic wells, and then it has all of the domestic well data associated with it. Because one of the things we need to consider is all of the undesirable results that occur and how that affects all the different stakeholders. Obviously, domestic wells are a very important topic, and so we want to take a look at those. Now, I want to be really clear, this isn't the only measure that's going to be looked at. This is an example of how, you know, these measures are being looked at. So there's a lot of things to consider in addition to this. There's water quality, there's existing stored groundwater, there's subsidence, there's all of these different factors that need to be looked at. But this is an example of how the technical experts are looking at it.
But probably the greatest impact is obviously a result of the lowering groundwater tables.
Exactly.
We've seen that recently due to the extended drought and what can happen. So this is obviously one of the most important things.
So basically what this is saying for domestic wells, so, if you look at, you know, this particular scenario and course of action, the water table on this particular well could drop 100 feet by 2035, give or
Yeah.
take.
Yes,
Right.
but also keep in mind that's assuming an average hydrology during the
That's
implementation
average
period.
hydro, assuming all
So,
the averages and
It
whatnot.
can swing greatly based on what the hydrology
Well,
actually
and
does.
that's a drought scenario over where that red arrow is. to
Well,
the
we're
right.
getting to that.
Well, the point is it's of a concern, because if you lower the water level 100 feet for a lot of people, it's gonna run them out of water.
And keep in mind that most of the projects are related to capturing wet year water supplies, right? That's what's putting water in the ground, obviously. So you see in the future greater swings in the highs and lows and variability of the groundwater levels because of more active groundwater recharge through the projects that are proposed.
Right.
How was that
So-
minimum threshold?
Yeah.
Is that calculated? Is that from the function of the slope of that line and they just took the intercept and?
Yeah, so this, again, I just want to focus really quick. the 2020 to 2040 is during the implementation period. And now the consultants have also modeled an additional 50 years, so 2040 through 2090 with all of these projects in place, and again with, you know, estimates on what the climate will do. And so, again, you can see this kind of brownish line, it starts to trend up and such. So the way that the measurable objective is being depicted on here is essentially the average past the 2040 time period. The way the minimum threshold is being identified here is taking, so this is actually a drought scenario that's being modeled here. So one of our discussions was, what if that drought scenario, worst case scenario, we'll assume it's extended for a 10-year time period. So it's essentially trending this drought scenario with the same slope line down to this level, which is now identified on this graph as the minimum threshold. And so that's the concept that was used for setting the measurable objectives and the minimum thresholds on this graph. So that's kind of what we're here to talk about. Does everybody think that that's an okay concept to utilize? Or any other thoughts? I mean, there's literally an infinite way that you can do this and that you can slice it. And so, you know, we're dealing with a lot of averages and a lot of unknowns and just trying to do something that's reasonable. You know, we've heard people say, well, just set the minimum threshold, you know, as low as the graph will go. And that, you know, that's an idea, but that's not necessarily, I don't think, Madera Basin's goal of achieving sustainability. You know, I think, you know, we do want to be sustainable going forward. And so we do need to set things, and plus, you know,
So-
we have to guess that DWR might not be okay with that. So we need to do things that do seem reasonable.
So the possible numbers that can be moved are the threshold and the objective? I mean, the input numbers that are going into the model, those
Well-
are kind of a done deal. aren't
Well,
they?
no, not necessarily. So that's another discussion point, is that, you know, this, as we sit today, the blue dot is about right there for this well. I have personally heard, and I'm sure you guys have also, you know, MID is sustainable, relatively sustainable, and has been since its existence, and is looking at going forward is going to remain sustainable. So, you know, we've heard landowners say, well, no, maybe it should just remain where it's at, you know, MID growers, because, right, they're not in their minds contributing to this. And so, you know, that's one concept too. And so this line isn't set in stone by any means. This is what is being modeled for the projects that have been brought to date by the GSA.
So saying that in a different way, we as MID need to look at this a little differently than others, because being that the district is very close to sustainable and will achieve sustainability very quickly in this implementation period, that borrowing of the groundwater or taking of the groundwater is impacting our growers directly. So what is this board ultimately going to be comfortable with allowing during this period of time while projects are implemented and sustainability is achieved basin-wide? And what are those impacts? So we've shown potential impacts to domestic wells, but there's also impacts to MID wells who are taking surface water, and in our view will be reaching that sustainability very quickly.
And so that's really kind of what's posed for you guys today is, you know, what is acceptable for the MID GSA related to this, not only related to where the minimum threshold and measurable objectives are set, but also where the brown trend line plays right now.
And this well is located within the MID, this particular well?
This particular well is located within the MID, within MID.
And, you know, of course, acknowledging going to zero immediately, sub-basin-wide would create an economic impact, and I don't think, not to speak for the board, but I don't think that's something that anyone would like to go with. Some would have that opinion, but not everybody.
Right.
What are the peak boxes?
Those are just showing low points for this
So during-
scenario.
It's a low point during the implementation period and low point after.
That interval from 1980 to 2020, I guess is forecast. How many dry years and wet years do you have? Is it pretty even?
Yeah, so that's how they actually define this the modeling period's like 1989 through 2015.
Because it'll change the slope depending on how many intervals you have of dry and wet.
Right, so this is actually, so the 1989 to 2015 time period was chosen by our consultants because they thought it depicted a pretty average conditions. There was pretty much average number of wet years, dry years, and normal years in that scenario. This slope though isn't really being that affected. The slope going forward shouldn't really be affected that much by the historic slope. Because the slope going forward is really looking at, you know, layering on the GSP projects and then climbing along with it. Not necessarily how the well historically performed.
So, given that there's, so this slope is based on what their models or what their basic model might show as their scenario to reach sustainability, correct?
Compliance.
This is
For the basin.
That line is showing what the model predicts with the implementation of the projects as currently.
As currently,
Assuming-
as currently proposed.
Basin. Why?
Assuming the average hydrology during the implementation period and wet and dry years based on historical information.
So, you know, the question is, first of all, on our deal, they call that water that's above that squiggly line.
Well, yeah, that's gonna be another discussion, so. Do you wanna discuss that?
Well, I don't know,
Okay.
the thing is, the base, if you wanna get down to the question, Brian, what I guess you're asking is it all right if by the time we reach sustainability, we drop our water level 100 acre feet, or 100 feet rather, not acre feet. We drop the water level in the pumping level in MID, because as well as any MID.
Well, for one example, well,
This is one example.
This is one example,
Yeah.
well, so some will be less, some will be
Right.
more.
But this is a basin-wide expectation, right? This is a basin-wide,
the trend should look
so if,
somewhat the same.
if we're saying that should the MID allow those growers, we're talking about everybody, right?
Correct.
I mean, if the growers with MID lose their water level, it's gonna be basin-wide levels, right?
It's gonna be basin-wide levels, but the point is the MID growers have been paying taxes or whatnot for a long time. And whatever water level we have right now is being sustained by the MID. And we're basically level here. We're basically sustainable here. The reason our water level is dropping is because basin-wide is being overpumped. And so the question, now the thing is as growers have talked to me that are in the MID, not in the Madera, but in the MID, and said, tell them to quit pumping right now. I don't want my well to drop anymore. If they did that, there'd be a train wreck in the county. I mean, how would that's, in my mind, not reasonable. But, so the question is, what is reasonable? Is dropping it over the next 20 years, 100 foot in the MID, because we're sustaining everybody around us, is that reasonable? You know? Because that water that's being overdrafted, essentially, is MID water. And then some. Okay?
And it had been.
Correct. And so we're spending all this money on, as MID, we just bought a basin. We're giving water, we're delivering water to growers to percolate in the ground for free or half price, or at the end of the year, almost nothing. We're doing everything we can to put as much water as we can in the ground. So is it reasonable over the next 20 years to say it's okay to drop, and it's not just our ag wells. How about everybody that lives in this basin that has a domestic, their pump is 25 feet off the bottom of the well right now? You drop it 100 feet, what's gonna happen to the domestic wells all around this county?
Well,
And
and-
so, you know,
yeah, and that's this example right here is that, you know, the average domestic well depth for this section lays here, then theoretically, you know, we'll say at least half of the domestic wells in this section would go dry at some point during the implementation period. Which we're not saying, you know, should or shouldn't be done. It's just, if that is what is gonna be accepted in the GSP for these projects and programs, then if and how will this be mitigated and by whom?
And if another drought hits,
Right, this is
and
not
you're
a
approaching
big
that
difference.
minimum threshold even earlier, what's gonna happen?
And that's a good point. Who's gonna pay for these domestic wells to go, you know? I mean, at some point, somebody outside the MID needs to start raising some money so they can mitigate some of this stuff. Which
Yeah.
at this point, they're not. But that's a whole nother issue, really. But, so anyway, the question is what is reasonable? Is zero, in my mind, isn't reasonable. Over 20 years, you know, to stop everybody from pumping right now, that's not reasonable. Then again, is dropping MIDs this well, or dropping our water level 100 foot, is that reasonable? I don't really think that's reasonable either. But, I mean, I think the goal should be, or that measurable objective, I mean, the goal should be to try to balance this thing as quick as we can, bring as much water in as we can. And if you're gonna have to bite the bullet, figure out how to start equitably retiring land or do whatever it takes, so guys that wanna leave can leave something. But, anyway, so that's the whole issue.
It's all, you know, I'd have to agree with everything you said. I mean, it's, the district's been bringing in water, it's been using as much water as we can possibly use to recharge on behalf of the growers. And to see a loss like this, there is, like you said, it's a train wreck, pulling everything to a halt, because this is a collaborative effort. And, you know, we all know this is coming down as soon as, you know, the brakes get put and the burden gets shifted, regardless if it's warranted. It's gonna be a difficult challenge to get everybody to be friendly and sit together and cooperate. Because then it's gonna be argumentative instead of collaborative. But
It may well be argumentative.
so, you know, I don't know what that is. I would like to see the least amount of, you know, damages to district growers when it comes to, you know, it was not too many years ago, we you know, had to extend our wells. They're not a cheap deal to do, but, you know, when you're in the district and you're paying your dues and you've been paying your dues in order to have that water available for you, it's kind of a tough stomach to burden when you're gonna have to, you know, feel like you're being taken care of, and you still have to flip out some personal finances to extend your well to maintain, even if you're within the range of the turnaround.
You know, the other question in my mind is too, is if you drop our water level in the MID right where we're putting the water in the ground, how about some of the white area and some of the tougher areas? What do you think the water level will do there?
That is a good question.
You know, I mean,
Has this been modeled on an outside district well?
Yeah, so they're looking at selecting wells right now as part of their monitoring and modeling procedure, but we just want to, I mean, you can look at hydrographs literally all day long, I mean, there's, you know, but we just wanted one example one for us to look at and talk about concepts related to it.
The plan looks at the economic impacts related to implement this program. So
Okay.
it'll be studying those.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not a modeler. I go to these aqua meetings, aqua conferences, and often, where you're always there. A lot of models take place, a lot of expectations, we've got excellent modeling, and, you know, to me, I just listen and I think, okay, that's a projection with
Yeah,
no
exactly.
information, and someone said, nah, that number's too high, and that one's too low, but that one's kind of realistic, let's use that number.
That is key to this, Brian, that is
Right.
very much a model with very rough data that's in it, and all it is a projection based on looking at some historical data and limited data points throughout the subbasin. So this is just a guesstimate based on average hydrology source, a drought would obviously cause much bigger decline in groundwater table. I mean, you can look at our historic numbers and see the trend that was going on before during the droughts.
So it's kind of tough to, I think I agree with, I think my deal is, minimum impact to district growers because of the fact that they've been committed to keeping the district going in terms of funding and bringing in the water and using it.
Do we need to give a specific number recommendation to the rest of the board? Or just a thought to the rest of the board so we can discuss?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a specific number, that's great. No, I mean, I think, again, we're talking very high level concepts with a lot of unknowns. It's just.
High level, this is satellite.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But just whether or not, this is what's gonna be included in the GSP. So if we don't think this is reasonable, if you guys don't think this is reasonable, we need to understand that as soon as possible so that we can go back to the other agencies who are developing the GSP along with the other GSPs, because they all, work together on this and figure out what, if anything else, GSAs can plan in the implementation period. And so.
Right now, we're just looking at general approach, so
Yeah.
is this committee comfortable recommending moving forward with an average hydrology and these type of results and setting the minimum threshold at something slightly below that point as shown on these example hydrographs?
Yeah.
What's the gray line from 1980 to 2020?
Don't quote me on this, but I believe that's the grade that they did, what's that?
That's the model.
Yeah, this is the grade simulation from the model.
So you have actual data points from that well, and then you have the model well.
It was like a
model predicting where the numbers would be.
Yes.
Truth be told.
So clearly their model's not that great.
Well,
It's pretty good.
It's
yeah.
pretty accurate,
it's
really.
a calibration, and so it just, yeah.
And
I mean, you also have to take into account the well measurements that were occurring back then, and I mean, you have human error, you have a lot of things going on, so none of this data is anything to,
You're dealing with a incredibly complex, huge subbasin with little teeny data points
Just a
that
dog
may or may
here.
not be correct.
Yes.
Related to these old historic records on these wells that, considering all of that, and looking at the general trends of the line, I think they were pretty happy with their results. They're never gonna be perfect.
Sure.
but
I
as long
think
as
I'd
in
like,
general shape.
I think I'd like to see, an outside district well model and how it compares. I don't know if I can look at this and just right now come up with something that says we should or shouldn't do that.
So we didn't bring those with us today, but in general, we're talking about the approach here. You're seeing some with minimal swings or changes in depths and some with larger. And it's just based on the local hydrology where that well is.
Yeah, I mean, if you pick up wells down by the San Joaquin River versus
Geology.
wells up in the, northeastern area, I mean, the fluctuations are huge.
The thing is I don't know that I have so much problem with, the minimum threshold level.
Okay.
As I do the goal, the cut goal,
The implementation.
the implementation.
Okay,
I think the goal should try to be a little bit more aggressive.
okay.
Now that's just my feeling. What that means exactly in exact numbers, I don't know. But,
Well, and that's fine, because the level of
basically,
detail we're talking.
everything that's above that squiggly line is overdraft.
Correct,
It's all overdraft.
correct,
It's not,
yeah,
it's not some other name. It's
Right.
overdraft.
yes, yes.
So
Anything above
we have
that,
a minimum threshold, but as a goal is to achieve far better.
And that's what my thought would be.
okay,
Right, you follow what I'm saying?
Okay.
Is okay, set the minimum threshold in that vicinity, all right, but I think the goal should be better than that.
okay.
But do you think the modeling should represent a more aggressive,
Yeah,
Well,
that's
no.
what I think.
so the
That-
modeling should represent, even though maybe you approve or we approve of the minimum threshold being set, they put the bar there, the correction should take place a little sooner, or should,
So boiling this all down, really the projects that have been proposed are scaled in such a way, and water projects are never easy. But to be funded and get them implemented, constructed, and built, they're really fixed to where they fall on that timeline. I mean, really the variable that we have to discuss is land retirement, absolutely. Absolutely, that's the
And,
big one that is the controversial topic that nobody wants to talk about, but how.
and this kind of
quickly you
timeline,
implement those programs.
you know, some of this stuff, and, you know, if a grower, you know, if a grower's getting started and, you know, they've got more years left in that field, I'd almost be empathetic to say, you're on the books, or you're in an area that would be good to retire, but maybe give them the.
Well, we're not gonna talk about the ways that the county should,
Move about.
move forward with their
Well,
GSA.
then-
We just
then-
need to focus on, as MID GSA, what are your
Then I-
reactions to
then-
this?
Then I just don't know if the speed at which you know, request the other GSAs to implement their projects to help
Yeah.
expedite that
Yeah,
is, you know, completely reasonable.
Right,
Yeah.
I don't know if you could just say, well, figure it out, right?
right,
There is a due diligence
at the time.
when it comes to accurately determining how to go about it. And they're happening right now, so there's dust in the air still.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's up to each GSA to figure out how they're going to implement it, but we need to consider how the timing,
How it impacts.
what level,
How it
what
affects
those
the district.
impacts could be.
What we wanna,
Yes,
what we wanna propose in order
Right.
to accommodate our growers within the whole plan.
exactly.
And the greater local
Yeah.
economy as a whole, right?
Right.
Go to,
And so, I'm hearing, you know, maybe we wanna request more aggressive, timeline on the projects. The other idea is, you know, to discuss the effects of leaving the line where it is and how those effects are gonna be mitigated. I mean, that's another way to look at it, is,
Yeah, we haven't gone there yet really to make the ask or the request and say, well, you know, our collaboration is gonna show that it's gonna be difficult on our growers.
So anyway, you wanna talk about that now?
yeah, so it's just, for instance, and again, this is a complete example, but for instance, if the line drops below this average gray line depth and 3 of the domestic wells within this section go dry, because even though it's in the MID GSA, we believe it's due to external forces, you know, will that be mitigated in some form or fashion? Or does it need to be mitigated? I don't know.
Hey Dave, I have a comment. I agree with almost everything you said today. There's a couple things you didn't say that I want to bring up. And the current owners of out-of-district land are not necessarily the owners that made the decision to keep that land out of district. So they're not your enemies. Some of them are victims of previous landowners. But that ground does carry the burden. And at some point in some time, somebody made a decision to not put it in the district, not pay the tax. I agree with you. So something has to be done there. The other thing is that within Madera Irrigation District, there is still some room, and I don't know where it is in this model, but there's still some elasticity because you still have some people running wells in the district that need to be using, and you're a huge proponent of it. I know I've heard you say it before. We got to get everybody in the district off their wells when there's surface water available. And so there's a little room for the district to make some improvement in that area.
Right?
So
And
So
there's-
those are just 2 points.
I agree with you, Bill, and the thing is, matter of fact, even this year, we have more and more guys who haven't taken water in like almost ever.
No, progress is being made. No, no
The
doubt.
real problem we had, and we have is, and a couple of years ago at our annual meeting, we put up a map, and I got it from Madera Pump, and, you know, the problem is you get, especially some of the smaller growers, not all smaller growers, but when you're, the further south you are, the less it costs to pump, you know, out of the ground, right? And so it's really difficult to tell those people, hey, quit pumping, and we had a lady in her, well, I assumed it was her husband, in here the other day. If the lower we could price water, the further south we could get more guys to hook up, even though I'm hooking up. And so the district is working on that. We've got a bunch of irons in the fire, and we're trying the best we can, and over time here to try to keep this price of water as low as we can. So more guys, which is one of the reasons we're hoping we can entice some guys by this early on a year like this, free water, a month, half price, anything we can do.
No, we use it, we did it, and we've done it, and I put my reservoir in, and I'm on the river, and I'm with you.
No,
I'm with you, all I'm saying is there is a measure of improvement that the district can make by getting these guys off their wells for in lieu of recharge in years like
No,
this.
you're-
And now we've had
exactly
2 years out of 3 years when we had a chance to shut every well off in the district.
And
And
Bill,
there's more to be done too.
And
I don't
I'm just
want-
saying,
I don't want it to imply that we're done and we have no work ahead.
no,
of us.
I just
Yeah.
wanted that to be said.
No, and I.
In this meeting, because I know that the out-of-district guys are, they got a burden to carry, and they're gonna take a lot of trees out. There's just no easy buttons there. But I just wanted to,
Yeah,
And-
sure,
Well,
we've got that, we've got more recharge efforts, we've got connecting more people, there's all of the above, and there's a mountain of work still to be done in the district to improve them. Right now, we could be moving more water, we have more places to put it.
I can't wait. We have, there was a major landowner in the district who never used a drop of water. And that property just changed hands recently. And the new owner is putting in reservoirs and plans to use and take all the water he could take. I'm ready to do a dance because it's a pretty sizable chunk. It'll take a lot of water. And so, but Bill, your point's well taken, when we know it, and so we're doing everything we can to help guys get hooked up.
yeah, and let me, and so, we've been saying, and, we've looked at our numbers and said, we're historically balanced, yet when you look at David's engineering numbers, it shows MID has a deficit. And the deficit occurs because they've taken 2017 land use or 2015 land use and applied it all the way back through their modeling period. And the difference is they took the actual historic water supplies during those years. So they took historic water supplies with 2015 land use. And so we've said all along that doesn't work because our water supplies and the way we manage water would have been different had we had a higher demand, right? Which the higher demand occurs later on in 2015. And so, but we've said, but that's a highly conservative number then to move forward with. So that's been the number that we've actually been utilizing for balance. And so that's why when you see MID's numbers, there is a deficit there because we are using the highly, highly conservative number. And so with that, we have now identified all of these different projects that we are going to continue to do throughout this implementation period, even though we are relatively balanced as we sit here today.
that's not
And
a
those-
bad thing, because you know what land use is doing
Well,
in
exactly.
the district. And you
Yes.
know, and just the grower that Dave mentioned, what's
Exactly.
happening out there.
Yes.
And that goes from
Right.
whatever to 4 feet.
Yes, and those projects include things though, like on-farm recharge and incentivizing landowners to utilize surface water when it's available and things like that. And so that's how we're trying to get to your point of everybody needs to utilize surface water when it's available. So those projects actually are being modeled in here and should be reflected in this brown line. The MID's projects, those projects are included in this. And that's still the result is the answer.
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, also for the record, those guys out there are our enemy. Matter of fact, a lot of them are my friends.
Yes, and a lot of them are also MID
No,
landowners.
and I know that,
Yeah,
and many of us are cross-dressers. I mean, we got a lot of district
Yeah,
land, and we got
exactly.
some out of
Yeah,
district land,
yes,
so.
I like that.
So,
Probably shouldn't use a new term.
That's on-
Oops.
Yeah.
well then, Brian, I don't know, as far as taking recommendations to our board.
I have a question on the minimum thresholds. So at the last Madera, the majority coordination,
yeah.
whatever the heck
Technical
that meeting
workshop,
was,
yeah.
yes,
Okay.
that was specific to this GSP.
Yes,
There were a couple of graphs that were shown and Chowchilla as well. There were graphs that showed minimum threshold where that little
Yes.
line came down beyond minimum threshold.
right.
Is this adjusted or is this still part of that same modeling?
No, so things are, evolving around here, and what was presented at that was, again, just some ideas and concepts for people to weigh in. Now, don't exactly quote me on this, because I would have to go back to David's and confirm, but I think at that point in time, they were actually not using average year scenarios here, and they were using a highly, highly conservative dry scenario. So this line was actually dipping much lower in here because of that. And so I think at that point they set it closer to this bottom because it was dipping so much further. So now that they've kind of changed this to average, we still want to look at dry year scenarios, which is why now that, you know, we're looking at this scenario with a 10-year extension essentially. So similar but not exactly the same. And some of that came out of the discussion actually at that workshop of, you know, of where people thought the thresholds should be, and, you know, different concepts that were floated about there. So, which is the point of the workshops, and that's the point of this meeting too, is to take, you know, the public and everybody's ideas and try to mesh them all into something that actually works in the GSP.
Well, even before you hit that minimum threshold, won't you trigger the undesirable effects because of domestic wells?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's just whether or not the sub-basin and the GSAs think that's
It's
acceptable
how
or
you
not.
define that, yeah.
And if we do allow this to occur, is mitigation one, is it necessary? And then two, how should it actually be done? Some people don't think it's necessary, others do, so.
There's a tremendous amount of state money available for the disadvantaged communities. It's just giving them access to it.
Well-
But that is gonna be one of the biggest problems about that drop, is the DAC.
Well, but I mean, this is all, I mean, it doesn't, although all of Madera is essentially considered a DAC, I mean, this is, you know, this could be any domestic.
Sure, no, I understand that,
Yeah.
but it impacts
Right, exactly, yes.
Those
totally,
clusters.
yeah.
You'd have to set up some sort of fund or something that people pull on.
Potentially, yeah, and so that's the question. So I think maybe if we break this down, we can simplify a little more. So the first question, Ryan and Dave, is, are you okay with this brown trend line? Essentially, again, acknowledging this as a complete example, you know, and very conceptually speaking, or
Well,
do you want this, do you want to see if this can be adjusted somehow by,
the thing is,
More
you just
aggressive
adjust the
threshold.
numbers and you just adjust the numbers. I mean, we just got done saying that under the drought circumstance, we saw that dip even more. So how much can we trust?
you have to,
You
you
can
have to
change the
assume that
numbers
there's
to
going to
get a-
be, unless we have an extremely wet 20-year scenario here.
I just don't know on which route to take when it comes to, are we just accepting the numbers that are inputted into the model and saying we just accept what's going on and that is what it is, or do we require them to change or numbers so that we see on paper a more desirable vision?
Well, it's, I mean, again, we're talking in concepts here, but is it, are you guys okay
acceptable
with
to
the
see
trend continuing this way for a period of time before it starts to correct?
And obviously, if you hit that minimum threshold, you have to react. There you have compliance to your plans, so there'll have to be actions taken through the
That's right.
GSAs and GSP to adjust.
Yeah, I'm trying, I want to talk about the trend.
I mean, again, it goes back to say we say no. So it's a no.
And what happens is this model shows that you don't start to flatten out or reverse the trend for 15 years.
Exactly. Which is probably timed with all of the projects starting to be implemented.
And also consider if it's a average, likely you're not gonna have any of your recharge projects provided that can fit the aquifer because an average year is not bringing a great recharge benefit. So, again, this is so difficult to actually, can't predict what the hydrology is gonna do, and the performance of the projects is based on the hydrology.
That's why we're leaving the decision.
It's very much just an approach discussion.
Yes, exactly. Okay, well, think about that. So that's question one, is are you okay
Table that.
with this, no, we're not table, but, are you okay with this brown trend line? The second question is, when we start to see effects such as domestic wells or other effects that might need to be mitigated, do you have any ideas of how you want this approached?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I think the guy that's doing the overdraft, he should pay for the mitigation.
Okay.
Just that simple. If we're hauling water in here, trying our darndest to keep the water level up in the entire basin, then it should be up to the guys that are overdrafting. And that's what I'm gonna call every bit of that, is overdraft. The guys that are causing the problem should pay for the problem.
How do you determine who's causing the problem?
How do we determine who's causing the problem?
Yeah, is it your next door neighbor? Is it the neighbor up the street?
No, I think we're talking GSA-wide.
GSA.
Yes. Yep. Correct? We're
Yeah,
talking GSA-wide.
I'm talking
Yeah.
about
I mean,
the GSAs.
and then the GSA could figure out a way to fund that through determining who's causing the problem, but high level at this point.
Essentially, any overdrafting that's occurring is contributing to the problem, so. Okay, so we're gonna come back to the trend
Brian,
line,
what do
the
you-
mitigation.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable
Okay.
to me.
So the next question is, and it somewhat relates to the trend line, but I think we can identify that differently. Are you okay with the concept of the measurable objective being identified as the average from 2040 through 2090? Wherever that trend line falls? Or do you want the objective higher? Or do you want the objective
Again,
lower?
You throw in a massive drought in there, and then that's the average, measurable objective is the average based on an assumed 10-year drought. So again, assumptions that make like lines as if their actual information is hard. So, I mean, to me, I don't see a problem with that measurable objective if the modeling data was used to be an extreme to show an average number, and that's our target of getting back to that zone. But if what would be the option? Say you want 60%, you want the average plus a little
I
swap?
mean, honestly, the objective can be anywhere.
Yeah.
The
Well,
GSA, as I
because-
said it, I mean, it could be at the top point.
This
It
is
could
what
be-
we submit to the water board, right?
This is what's going to DWR.
So, it was said in the meeting, it's kind of general is, we don't want to set ourselves up for failure either. We want to have enough cushion that as a whole,
Right,
we achieve our goals.
yeah. And, with the the measurable objective is just that, it's the objective. So, it's just, do you guys like that concept? Like this, again, for instance, if you take into account all the different assumptions, theoretically, the measurable objective would be higher than the water surface currently is. The water
I
levels
think
currently are.
that's, for lack of anything else, I think that's,
Okay,
Yeah. I
Agreed.
think
as put forward in this particular model.
okay, so we're okay with average on that. And then the next question is the minimum threshold. So are you guys okay with the concept of taking a drought period and extending it out a 10-year time frame?
Yeah.
Setting a threshold there. Or do you want the threshold set higher? Do you want it set above the average domestic well depths? Do you want it set
So that's what
lower?
I
Do
mean,
you want it
if we're
set-
doing this as a GSA-wide deal, there'd be a lot of benefit to not go below that average domestic well. There'd be a lot less mitigated damages, or a lot less damages that need to be mitigated. But whether it's a reasonable objective, a reasonable deal for us to hit and the project to be implemented and we charge the